What's up guys, welcome to AnimeKouhai. If you'd like to help me out, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel.
Magical healing tended not to work very much on illness, it was meant more for physical injury, although certain other spells were better honed to deal with particular diseases. Boosting a patient's physical strength didn't matter much if the root of the disease wasn't cured. Injury and disease, after all, required two completely different schools of treatment. If you needed someone who could totally cure a disease, well, there were only one or two holy magic practitioners of that caliber per nation. They were rare treasures, and barring special circumstances, they'd never serve in military combat. Death spread its tendrils across this floor as well. Floor 85 was dominated by a royal tiger, patrolling the thick deciduous forest that was its domain. The magical beasts that roamed freely on the other floors were completely under this tiger's thrall. This ruler was the Thunder Tiger, a big cat that controlled lightning. While the Empire thought it had the upper hand before it showed up, this perceived advantage didn't last long. Put rapidly on the defensive, they were forced back to their base by the stairway. The forest belonged to the monsters, and despite being literally cornered to one edge of it, the soldiers continued their struggle. Floor 86 was a desert occasionally dotted by oases. The sun shone brightly, the temperature rising every minute it was in the sky. When it left at night, the cold chilled to the bone. The temperature difference was so great that it sapped the strength of many soldiers before battle even began. They assumed the climate would be their greatest enemy here, and while they weren't wrong, they weren't exactly right, either. The real trap here was the oxygen in the air. The winged snake was here, and the domain it ruled over was the air. Controlling its composition, reducing the oxygen level to zero, for example, was like taking candy from a baby. And when the soldiers assumed the temperature difference was something they'd get over after some rest, that was all it took to ensure a peaceful passing in their sleep for every one of them. Floor 87 was, for some reason, a vast mountain range. The tranquil views reminded many soldiers of their families back home. If they let themselves reminisce for a moment, they could bask in their happy childhoods and envision lovers they dreamed of seeing once more. It took just under 5 days for them to become fully relaxed. That was partly thanks to the low monster rates around the peaks. Unlike many other floors, it was difficult to maintain alertness. And that was why they never noticed that the guards on duty had fallen asleep, never waking up. They only seemed awake thanks to a hallucination in their own minds. This was the work of the sleeping ram, a peace-loving soul that, with its gentle invitations, had reaped the consciousness of all the soldiers without a drop of bloodshed. The sleeping ram's illusory hypnosis lured them all to sleep, a sleep they would never awaken from. Floor 88, a forest bordering a great river, was home to a bird of raging flames. Strangely, this fire never spread itself to the surrounding trees. It could only burn those who were hostile to it, and when it did, it went on forever, never fading. This was the firebird, the master of the flames, and it served as the floor boss here. This firebird and the other avian creatures that served under it quickly burned all the invading soldiers to a crisp. Floor 89 was a maze made of mirrors. Nothing organic played a role on this floor, it was immaculately maintained, with every mirrored surface polished to a fine sheen. All the reflections on the walls, of course, complicated the maze further for the intruders, and the mirrors themselves were unbreakable. Why? Because they were created with a secret spell from a single monster, the mirror dog, flitting across every reflective surface. Running freely among the mirrors, it toyed mercilessly with the Imperial army. It existed within the mirrors themselves, mirrors that bounced all magic back to the casters. This made it hard to so much as catch the mirror dog in action, and as it reflected itself more and more, multiplying to seemingly infinite numbers, the pitiful prey were all devoured. At every level, vicious floor bosses were on the rampage. Each had been granted an environment best suited for their traits, allowing them to demonstrate their abilities to the fullest. Still, the Imperial army tried their hardest to resist. Sometimes, they were even able to defeat these bosses, cheers erupting across the floor whenever they did. But they came right back to life, again and again, and that truth frightened them more than anything else. The situation on the other floors was much the same, as the rumor mill had it. The realization broke the soldiers' hearts, as it made continuing the fight seem utterly pointless. And as for the most desperate among them all, the monkey, rabbit, mouse, tiger, snake, ram, bird, and dog were all mystic beasts, the 8 legions serving Kumara, nothing more than her cherished pets. Each one was a transformation born from one of her tails, and their respective abilities were granted by Kumara herself. When all 8 came together, that was when Kumara took her full form. She was no longer a child, but one of the world's most beautiful women, Nine-Head Kumara, guardian of Floor 90 and the master of these 8 mystic beasts. And now a group of foolish, pathetic victims were coming her way. They were nothing but food for Kumara, thus the death toll within the labyrinth climbed that much higher. 530,000 Imperial soldiers invaded the labyrinth. Just a few days later, the number of survivors dropped to 0.
Volume 13, Chapter 4, Total Victory, Part 1.
A full week had passed since the labyrinthine invasion began. One by one, the gate took in all those Empire soldiers, and still it remained silent. Calgurio had to bide his time seething to himself over the unannounced news, the undelivered reports. That frustration was his body's way of disguising the fear his instincts were manufacturing for him. Even at this late stage, he still had no contact with the other troops, and on top of that, all contact with the rest of the labyrinth was gone. At first glance, they seemed completely isolated behind enemy lines, which unnerved Calgurio.
No one's returned yet, still?
There was no answer to his ranting, and that, in a way, was the best answer they could give him. Both Calgurio and his staff officers knew the situation wasn't looking good now. On the first day, they had sent squadrons of soldiers inside on multiple occasions, and they had brought intel on the labyrinth back for him. Nobody could get back out, but they could still initially communicate with the people inside, at least. Compiling what they relayed to him, he was able to get a rough idea of their status. Upon entering the labyrinth, soldiers were required to confirm that they wished to remain inside. Once they did, they were presented with the conditions for beating the labyrinth. Defeat the 10 marvels within and collect the 10 keys in their possession. Doing so will grant you the right to challenge the king of the labyrinth. Defeat the king, and you will have beaten the labyrinth. They all thought it'd be easy at first, but now they had to admit it was a bad decision on their parts. According to the information they managed to gather, the labyrinth contained at least 50 floors. Troops coming in would be transported to different floors in turns, 1,000 at a time. That allowed new soldiers to eventually reach out to those who entered earlier, but these contacts didn't begin to happen until over 50,000 soldiers had stormed in. Given the repeated sorties over 3 days, there were probably going to be 54 or so floors down there. The report from Shinji's party, as given by Yuki, stated that the labyrinth contained 60 floors, but it had become clear fairly early on that this intel was shaky at best. After all, the strength of the monsters inside was far different from what they had heard. Shinji's claim that the White King was the boss of the labyrinth pretty much destroyed any shred of his credibility. The White King's floor was discovered on day 2, judging by the reports, and apparently he was but one of the so-called 10 dungeon marvels. Some among Calgurio's staff still feared that the rumors were true, but either way, nobody was smiling now.
Even for our finest elites, it must be a great challenge.
Indeed, sir. If we don't do something, I fear this entire invasion might end in failure.
Calgurio shuddered. This was not acceptable to him. Mission failed was easy enough to say, but it translated to the deaths of 530,000 Imperial soldiers. Those were granted to him by Emperor Rudra, and every single one of them was a valued asset. There was no way he could simply abandon them all. But they were still just 7 days in. They had plenty of time before their scheduled limit. They must have still been fighting away inside the labyrinth. All Calgurio could do was trust in that and wait. That should have been the right option, but Calgurio, really, his entire staff, too, felt they were traversing a path straight to failure like this. It was the 10 marvels who made them think this way. Currently, the Imperial soldiers had obtained 4 of the keys, mentioned in the rules, specifically from the 4 Dragon Lords, who would apparently revive themselves again and again if beaten. As for the remaining 6 marvels, however, nobody on the field had any idea how to even hurt them. That was certainly true for the White King, but even the Death Paladin by his side was a menace. Then there was the Queen of the Insects, the mistress overseeing a pack of magical beasts, and the attacking golem nicknamed the Ghost of Gadra by the troops. And they didn't even know the identity of the 10th and final one at all. Unless they could defeat these 6, beating the labyrinth was a pipe dream. And both Calgurio and his staff unanimously agreed that it simply wasn't possible with the fighting force currently in the labyrinth.
At this rate, we could put everything the Empire's got in there and achieve nothing.
Indeed, sir.
That would be a waste of resources. It'd also affect our defenses here on the surface.
So what were they to do? There was only one answer. They'd have to conquer the labyrinth the way it was always supposed to be conquered, with a small team of elites. But if that was their option, the question became who they would pick for the job. After stewing over it for a little while, he decided to gather the best people who remained among the surface forces, a total of 100 men and women. Only those who were truly elite, or at least, powerful and ready to show it, were recruited. Sitting in the front row was an elegant-looking gentleman, wearing a neatly starched uniform despite being in a military field camp. This man's name was Minutes, a high-ranked major general. Calgurio trusted him more than anyone else, making him his pick to command this operation. Next to Minutes was a man smoking a cigarette, looking like he was pondering the sheer futility of life. His fearless gaze, as if staring down his prey, and his well-kept beard instilled a sense of awe in anyone who encountered him. Fortunately for him, he also had the talent to ensure that he never betrayed the expectations of anyone who challenged him. This was Colonel Kanzis, a true champion with countless glorious achievements to his name, most notably, the notorious Operation Mystic Sweep, which he had personally commanded. He always kept a dignified demeanor, perhaps a sign of his supreme self-confidence. Even when dealing with superior officers, he never showed a hint of fear. Very few people warned Kanzis about this, and they had no right to. He reported directly to Minutes, and Minutes tolerated his attitude well enough. Calgurio had his thoughts about this, but not to the point that he'd complain about one of the Empire's most famed heroes. He left Kansas's handling entirely to Minutes, so if Kanzis went out of line here, there'd be no one to stop him. Among the rest of the group of 100, Lucius and Raymond stood out in particular. They were both otherworlders. Lucius possessed the unique skill fusionist, letting him set off highly explosive attacks that were the talk of the Imperial Army. Raymond, on the other hand, had the unique skill combatant. As a former martial artist, this was basically his old job-taking skill form. It made him a first-class fighter, mastering any weapon, fighting style, and art he had learned in this world. Those were the four most famous names, but the others were also walking armies of their own. They all ranked at least an A, and even among the Empire's illustrious ranks, each was a 1 in 10,000 talent. These 100 people alone could destroy the Night Corps of entire nations, and now Calgurio was entrusting the entire operation to this set of champions.
All right, you understand the situation?
They all silently nodded. Some, like Kanzis, of course, smirked at the question, but most were earnestly listening to Calgurio's words.
Our comrades in the Labyrinth are currently awaiting relief. In order to leave, we must satisfy all the conditions, and that includes defeating the Demon Lord. My armored division is the strongest in the Empire, and I know they're up to solving this most difficult of tasks. But there is no time to waste.
The Labyrinth was not the kind of place you could overrun with human wave tactics. Calgurio understood that now, although he could never honestly say so, lest he torpedoed his army's morale.
That's it for this video, guys. Thank you for always watching my videos and supporting my channel.
Shout out to the new members of AnimeKouhai supporters: Jason Reyes, Andre Hamilton, Jason Torres, Sesh, Launch Specialist 8, Zahakob Aid, Sam, Jovi, Sergio Aguilar, Martin Ramos. Thank you so much for helping out. I'll see you guys in the next video.